Sarah Plain and Tall, Chapter 5. Take a look at our comprehension questions. What one thing upsets Sarah in this chapter? What one thing makes Sarah happy in this chapter? So already we should be thinking she's going to get upset and get happy. What is a dune? At the end of the chapter, we are not sure if Sarah will stay or go. What do you think Sarah will do? So think about the different things that have happened so far in the story, along with chapter 5, and what do you think? What's your opinion on if Sarah will stay or go? Go ahead, pause the video, open up to chapter 5. When you're ready, go ahead and continue. We're going to read chapter 5. The sheep made Sarah smile. She sank her fingers into their thick, coarse wool. She talked to them, running with the lambs, letting them suck on her fingers. She named them after her favorite aunts, Harriet and Mattie and Lou. She lay down in the field beside them and sang, "Soomer is a coomin' in," her voice drifting over the meadow grasses carried by the wind. She cried when we found a lamb that had died, and she shouted and shook her fist at the turkey buzzards that came from nowhere to eat it. She would not let Caleb or me come near, and that night Papa went with a shovel to bury the sheep and a lantern to bring Sarah back. She sat on the porch alone. Nick crept up to lean against her knees. So I can draw a conclusion in this paragraph about what happened is the sheep had died, and Sarah had stayed there with the sheep all day till it was almost dark, because it says Papa went with a shovel to bury the sheep and a lantern to bring Sarah back. So she must have been there a long time, kind of mourning this sheep. So what one thing has already upset her? After dinner, Sarah drew pictures to send home to Maine. She began a charcoal drawing of the fields rolling like the sea rolled. She drew a sheep whose ears were too big, and she drew a windmill. "Windmill was my first word," said Caleb. "Papa told me so." "Mine was flower," I said. "What was yours, Sarah?" "Dune," said Sarah. "Dune?" Caleb looked up. "In Maine," said Sarah, "there are rock cliffs that rise up at the edge of the sea, and there are hills covered with pine and spruce trees, green with needles. But William and I found a sand dune all our own." Listen carefully. "It was soft and sparkling with bits of mica, and when we were little, we would slide down the dune into the water." So the dunes are soft, you can slide down them. Caleb looked out the window. "We have no dunes here," he said. Papa stood up. "Yes, we do," he said, and he took the lantern and went out the door to the barn. "We do?" Caleb called after him. He ran ahead. Sarah and I followed, dogs close behind. Next to the barn was Papa's mound of hay for Betty, nearly as tall as the barn, covered with canvas to keep the rain from rotting it. Papa carried the wooden ladder from the barn and leaned it against the hay. "There," he smiled at Sarah, "our dune." So this big mound of hay turned into a dune. And then Sarah was talking about a mound of sand. Sarah was very quiet. The dogs looked up at her, waiting. Seal brushed against her legs, her tail in the air. Caleb reached over and took her hand. "It looks high up," he said. "Are you scared, Sarah?" "Scared? Scared?" exclaimed Sarah. "You bet I'm not scared." She climbed the ladder, and Nick began to bark. She climbed to the very top of the hay and sat looking down at us. Above, the stars were coming out. Papa piled a bed of loose hay below with his pitchfork. The light of the lantern made his eyes shine when he smiled up at Sarah. "Fine?" called Papa. "Fine," said Sarah. She lifted her arms over her head and slid down into the soft hay. She lay laughing as the dogs rolled beside her. So now Sarah's laughing and laying in the hay. What one thing makes Sarah happy in this chapter? "Was it a good dune?" called Caleb. "Yes," said Sarah. "It is a fine dune." Caleb and I climbed up and slid down, and Sarah did it 3 more times. At last, Papa slid down, too, as the sky grew darker and the stars blinked like fireflies. We were covered with hay and dust, and we sneezed. In the kitchen, Caleb and I washed in the big wooden tub, and Sarah drew more pictures to send to William. One was of Papa, his curly hair and full of hay, One was of Papa, his hair curly and full of hay. She drew Caleb sliding down the hay, his arms, like Sarah's, over his head. And she drew a picture of me in the tub, my hair long and straight and wet. She looked at her drawing of the fields for a long time. Looking at that field for a long time. Something is missing, she told Caleb. Something. And she put it away. What do you think Sarah thinks is missing from the fields? Dear William, she read to us by the lantern that late. Dear William, she read to us by lantern light that night. Sliding down our dune of hay is almost as fine as sliding down the sand dunes into the sea. Caleb smiled at me across the table. He said nothing, but his mouth formed the words I had heard too. Our dune. So there's another hint that she might stay. It says our dune. At the end of the chapter, we're not sure if Sarah will stay or go, so think about how she kind of is saying something's missing, writing to William, all the things that happen in this chapter. What do you think Sarah will do? Pause the video and answer these questions. I'm going to move on to the vocabulary. And she shouted and shook her fist at the turkey buzzards that came from nowhere to eat it. What are turkey buzzards? Well, it's a plural noun, and it means a type of bird similar to a turkey that can fly and will eat dead animals. Are you scared, Sarah? When Caleb asked that. Scared is an adjective, means it describes a noun, and it means frightened or afraid. At last, Papa slid down too, as the sky grew darker and the stars blinked like fireflies. Let's talk about fireflies first. Fireflies is a plural noun, flying insect whose abdomen glow with light. So abdomen's kind of the middle part of them, and glows with light. That's important because it's used as a simile, which compares two things using like or as. The stars blinked like fireflies. It's comparing the stars to fireflies to give you a good mental image of maybe what the stars looked like as they were sliding down the hay dune, or when Papa finally did it. Another example of a simile from this chapter. Sliding down our dune of hay is almost as fine as sliding down the sand dunes into the sea. So this is comparing the hay dune that they used in this chapter to the sand dunes that Sarah used to slide down. And it's using as fine as, to compare them. And that is what a simile does. It compares two things using like or as.